had a meeting at Evanston Township High School. It was a public financing discussion and kickoff event that is going to lead into what we're calling Equitable Evanston. It's a campaign that's going to be focused on passing a campaign finance ordinance in the city of Evanston. I think from an equity, I'll take it from with an equity lens. Right now, we have a small group of people who donate to campaigns. We have a small amount of people who determine elections, local elections, and statewide elections because they actually vote. And we have, even smaller amount of people that run. There it is, that run for office. And so ultimately, we have a system that is really focused on investing and prioritizing people with money and people who vote. And so what happens to the majority of folks who feel disconnected from their local governing bodies and state and national governing bodies? And so both of these programs, whether it's voucher or whether it's small donor, are going to answer the question, how do we get more people engaged? How do we get more people to vote? How do we get more people to show up to city council, to show up to committees, to run for office, to speak during public comment, to organize their local community around issues that are important? How do we do that? And I think this can begin to start to address that fundamental problem that we have.
So I'll tell you about the two options. So the two options that were discussed today are one, which is a small donor matching program, and we also discussed vouchers. The small donor matching program has been implemented in municipalities throughout the nation. It's a more popular model. New York does it. Typically, with that system, it limits the amount of money a candidate can raise. In New York, it's $500 that you can raise from a single donor, and then that money up to $150 is matched in New York 6 times, in other places, 3, somewhere usually between 3 to 6 times. And so that'll turn a $25 donation into a $150 donation. So that's a great system to make sure that small donors are
matched by public.
And it's matched by public dollars.
Clear,
Yeah. And so candidates have to qualify for that system by getting petition signatures, by raising a certain threshold, and by becoming viable candidates. The option that I prefer is the voucher option, and that's been tried in Seattle. It was implemented in 2017 after a ballot initiative that passed in 2016 as a part of a larger reform package. And in Seattle, they have what they call democracy vouchers. And I think that'll work best here in Evanston because we don't have an issue like our Congress or Chicago or other places with corruption here in Evanston, at least from my viewpoint. I think our bigger problem is a problem that's shared throughout the nation. It's participation. It's folks feeling like they have a voice in our democracy. And the vouchers give, in Seattle, $100 to every registered voter in the city. And if you're not registered, you can apply to receive the voucher. You get 4 $25 vouchers. You can give it to any candidate or political action committee. And what that has done in Seattle is it's shown that it's increased participation amongst low propensity voters. So that's folks, low-income folks, voters of color, and young voters. And in Seattle, the greatest thing is that 85% of donors in the 2017 election were first-time donors. So this means that we're increasing the number of folks who are participating. Also, the greatest number of organizations, Win-Win and another organization from DC did a study. And what they found is that of first-time voters, many of those first-time voters were folks who were also donors. And so it's shown to increase voter participation. And I think that's an issue we have here in Evanston. In our last municipal election, we saw 30% turnout. In the municipal election before that, we saw 10% turnout.
And from what wards?
Throughout the city, but typically lower voter turnout tends to affect our lower income communities here in Evanston. So that's the 5th ward, that's the 8th ward, that's the 2nd ward. And we see very high voter turnout and participation in donors, and most of our donors coming from the 6th and 7th ward. And most of our mayors come from the 6th and 7th ward. And so by implementing a small donor match program or a voucher program, I think we can increase the number of folks who are running from throughout the city, and we can also increase participation in folks throughout the city. And that's a goal of my office as the local election official.
So I have 2 questions. One is, what do you want to ask people to do if they watch this video and they do one thing first? So what should they do?
I think folks should One, look into the two systems. Common Cause and Evanston Collective have committed to listening to the voice of the people and saying that, one, yes, we do need some kind of public financing reform, but there are several models. So I'd say first look into the two models, see which one you support, get involved in the campaign, and contact the mayor, contact your alderman, and let them know that you support public financing of campaigns and that you want to see Evanston be a Midwestern leader and making sure that all of our voices are heard in our democracy.
And where can they find
The
the
last thing
information?
I'll say
about
is, what we also can measure is, and the clerk has been a leader on this, is who's not voting in elections. We know it. Election cycle after election cycle, like we know down to the precinct, precincts that are down to the household,
yeah.
down to the individual, who the lower voter turnout individuals are and precincts are, and so we can flip that. We know this is how many people aren't voting, and let's see, after campaigning, after we invest, after we educate, how many people vote in the next cycle. We can measure that. We know people who are funding now in Evanston. We can look it up. All this is publicly available. How many people after we pass this voucher system, let's say, now are funding different candidates of their choice. So all of these, we can measure who's running for office. It's the same thing that Daniel said. Like, I would say probably 80 to 90% of the mayors and elected officials probably come from those 3 wards in Evanston that everybody knows about. 6, which is in Northwest Evanston, 7, which is in Northeast, and 1, which is by the lake. And so we know, okay, this is how many people in the past 2 decades, ran for office. This is where they lived. Let's look at the next decade, the next 2 decades, and see who runs. Like, all this stuff can be measured, basically.
But campaign finance reform basically trickle down equity.
I would say it's trickle up equity.
Trickle up
Yes.
yes.
We're starting a campaign called Equitable Evanston, which we'll try to figure out in short amount of time, like what's the, where's the community at? Do we want small donor? Do we want voucher? And then we'll try to organize folks around the campaign. So, calling our alderman, yes, but also sometimes before you call the alderman, you get people behind you first to say, hey, look, we have a coalition and kind of a grassroots organization built, and this is what people are saying they want. Equitable Evanston is definitely the campaign we want folks to join. Right now, again, as the clerk said, we're trying to determine is it going to be small donor? Is it going to be voucher? I am also of the inclination that it should be voucher. I think it's wonderful, especially for Evanston. I don't think it's a candidate issue per se. And if it is a candidate issue, I think what we can combine with voucher is we can try to give people, try to make it increase the salaries of our elected officials. That's something that's been talked about. Because right now, we've talked a lot about living wage. It's not a living salary to be an alderman, and so you're more likely to get candidates who are like well off or who are retired and have done really well. Running for office. But if it was a livable salary, then I think more people would say, hey, this is an opportunity that actually can find the time to do.
I think they should be, not time.